Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's edition of Black Health Trust. We are so happy that you chose to share some time with us this afternoon, and we are excited about our guest today. She is a regular participant, and today we're going to have an opportunity to share with you some of her insights since she has written her book, but more about that in a few minutes. For now, let me turn it over to our founder, Dr. Randall Maxey.
Thank you very much, Dr. Neighbor-Stevens. I appreciate you, Dr. Walks and Dr. Hines, and of course, our guest speaker. So this has been an interesting period of time in late January, early February, that a lot has happened to remind us of who we are and where we are and the things that we have to unite behind. Most of our moderators, all of our moderators, and many of the physicians and providers that you see online have dedicated themselves to be trusted messengers in the hope that we can elevate the health information and health practices that our audience does. And we've had some incidents with police violence, with death, and all sorts of things that express self-hate that we want to go against. But before we start, I'd like Simon to play a special presentation for a minute. And then, as they say in the Baptist Church, in the next voice you hear will be Dr. Neighbor-Stevens introducing our guest speaker, Dr. Rhonda Moore Johnson. Simon?
Till earth and heaven ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea.
It is my pleasure to present a colleague that I have known for some time. We are a fellow alum of Harvard University, but I actually met her through our activities in National Medical Association section on pediatrics. Dr. Rhonda Moore Johnson is a Pittsburgh native, physician and career health executive. She has dedicated her professional life to improving the health of under-resourced and medically vulnerable at home and around the world. She practiced pediatrics and adolescent medicine in Albany, Georgia, and Cincinnati, Ohio. After completing her undergraduate degree, she earned her MD at Pennsylvania State University and her MPH from Ohio State University. She founded Health Embraced Consulting, LLC in 2021 after her retirement from a career that spanned 2 decades at Highmark Blue Cross Blue Shield. She has led and participated in global missions in Mexico, Haiti, Brazil, and Kenya. She is an active member of Triumph Church, a lifetime associate of Jack and Jill of America, and a recipient of numerous awards, including the 2016 YWCA Racial Justice Award in Health, 2016 Jefferson Award for Public Service, 2021 Iota Phi Foundation, Omega Psi Phi Fraternity Citizen of the Year, and 2022 Josh Gibson Foundation Gibson Award for Civic Service. For more than 10 years, she has regularly contributed to local print publications with health information for the Black community. During the COVID-19 pandemic, her social media videos on how to prevent infection, survive infection, and prevent complications from the novel coronavirus have been seen by millions of viewers on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. Her experience as a social media influencer is highlighted in her recently published book, My Journey: How One Medical Doctor Helped People Handle Difficult Times During the Pandemic. Without further ado, we will now hear from the esteemed Dr. Rhonda Moore Johnson.
Well, first, I want to say thank you, Barbara, for the introduction. And thank you to the executive leadership team of the Black Health Trust. It was December of 2021 when I got this call, first through an email from Dr. Helen Davis, who used to be one of our Black physicians here in Pittsburgh. Now she's gone on to California to practice ophthalmology. But she said, my daughter has seen you on television in Pittsburgh talking about the pandemic. And so she said, we've got this group called the Black Health Trust. And she said, we would like for you to speak. So from December 2021 until today, I have tried to make Sunday now is part of the Black Health Trust for me. And so I just appreciate everything that you all do in terms of trying to get information out to the community. And I have enjoyed being a part of this Sunday gathering. And I want to do a shout out to some of my family. They are on the call, they're on the Zoom today, my family, my friends, and most importantly, my mother. My mother is here with me. She just waved. So I get to say, hi, Mom. And I'm so thankful that my mother is here with me today via Zoom.
Now, Dr. Johnson,
Yes.
we are ready to begin our discussion of your book.
All right.
I am going to put the link to the book on Amazon in chat in just a moment.
Okay.
But I don't know, did you have some introductory remarks, or shall we begin right on into our questions?
You can go ahead and just go right on into your questions and I'll go from there.
Well, our usual format for those who are joining us for the first time is for the co-moderators to go back and forth with our guest and discuss and ask questions. And if we get questions in the chat, we will integrate those into the conversation as well. So I will start it off with the first question, and then it will go to Dr. Walks and then to Dr. Hines. So my first question to you is, why did you write the book?
Okay. Well, I want to share, if you can see, my book is called My Journey: How One Medical Doctor Helped People Handle Difficult Times During the Pandemic. I started writing this book last summer, and it was published. It's available on Amazon. It was published in November of last year. And I wanted to tell my story of the experience of being a physician educator on social media. A lot of people watched my videos on Facebook and Instagram and YouTube, and then it really did blow up when I started posting them on TikTok. And this whole journey has been one of the most fascinating adventures I have ever been on. You know, not everyone is on social media, There, even in this day, I meet people who say, I am not on social media and I will never get on social media. But social media is this big, powerful virtual community where everybody has a voice, and everybody's voice can be heard on social media. And so by writing this book, I wanted to capture this experience of how people coped, didn't cope, how they navigated the pandemic, because I was a part of so many people's navigation during these past 3 years. So that is really my purpose in writing the book, to capture that experience. 10 years from now, we won't remember what it was like. We might not remember the panic and the fear or the aggravation of waiting in long lines to get a COVID test. We may not remember how people struggled to get a COVID vaccine, how many people had to use online sign-up systems for the first time in their lives. We may not remember how overcrowded the hospitals and the emergency rooms were, because this has been a very traumatic experience, and part of the human response to trauma is to forget. So by writing the book, I feel like anybody who reads my book will kind of really sense through real people how the pandemic impacted their lives.
Wow, that's fabulous, Dr. Johnson. And thank you again for being with us. So a lot of the folks with us today have not had the opportunity to read the book. What is the big takeaway, or one of the primary takeaways that you want folks to have today that will motivate them to actually go and get the information, the great information that's in the book?
Well, I'm going to be reading a lot from my book today. I feel that the story is about the people, so I should just best tell their stories through their own words. But that's really what you will get from the book. In many ways, you'll relive your own experience during the pandemic. And the other thing that I think we'll get out from talking today, and I hope this will be a very interactive session, Dr. Walks, is, what can we do differently next time? As physician educators, you're a physician educator. You've spent so much of your life as a public health professional trying to prepare people for events just like we've experienced in the pandemic. So maybe we'll learn something today that we, as physician leaders, trusted voices in the Black community, how we can do better if the next pandemic comes along.
Thank you.
That's a great segue to the question that I was going to ask, which was around, so for those of you who hadn't had a chance, like the book is filled with various excerpts of comments that Dr. Johnson received from her postings. And in reading them, some of the comments, it made you almost feel like you got a glimpse into people's lives, or a little snapshot into people's lives sometimes, because they would put, you could feel some of the desperation sometimes in their questions, or the way things were worded, or that type of thing. So I was wondering, Dr. Johnson, what are some of the comments that you received that stand out to you most, and why?
Okay, well, let's just turn a little bit to I'll read, because I realize people don't have my book. So people had a lot of anxiety about the pandemic. There was anxiety, they were confused, people weren't getting the information that they needed. Remember, many doctors' offices were swamped. My viewers told me, I have put in a call to my doctor's office. It's been 3 days. I can't get a call back. People were waiting outside in the parking lots of emergency rooms. People didn't know who to believe, what to believe. They were getting a lot of information from TV sources. We were all thrust into this world where we had to take tests at home. All of a sudden we're doing rapid tests. There was just so much confusion, and there was confusion around the therapies. So I'll talk a little bit about some of the things that people shared with me. So on page 179 of my book, someone said, "Thank you for easing my anxiety a bit." I would just give general tips. And someone said, "Thank you for sharing these tips." When one time I talked about coping mechanisms, someone said yes to all these coping mechanisms, especially the ones where we take the focus off ourselves and are in service to others. Another person said, "Thanks, Dr. Johnson. Your calming advice helps reduce anxiety. Keep sharing your wisdom." Someone else said, "I needed to hear this. I've been so anxious today, worrying about the pandemic." Another person said, "Hi, doctor, can you help me? I'm terrified to touch anything in case I catch it. Groceries, any packaging, anything in my home. I haven't left my house." Again, this pandemic really affected people, and it touched their lives in a very major way. And again, as I said, I tried to capture some of this. Some people appreciated what I did. Other people, of course, didn't appreciate and didn't trust anything I said. So someone said, "I just love your approach and your tone. You're smart, sweet, and approachable. Thank you for these awesome videos." Another person said, "How do I cope with COVID? When I work on an airplane and many people refuse to wear their masks." This goes to what you said, Jocelyn, about people telling you about their everyday struggles. When many people refuse to wear their masks properly while in a tube, 35,000 feet above with 150 to 300 people, in addition to people not wearing masks properly or not at all when navigating the airport from gate to gate. I walk my dogs 2 to 3 times a day. I'm a crafter. I help take care of my 87-year-old mother. I've stopped watching the news, but I still feel anxiety every time I go to work, knowing I'm vaxxed and boosted, but I'm feeling very anxious sometimes, and I find myself just wanting to scream.
Thank you.
I think I want to read a comment that just popped into the chat that really, I think, goes to what you were just talking about. This is from one of our community, Mr. Tony Wofford, who says, "As a people, we do ourselves a tremendous injustice if we stop talking about what we as a people suffered during COVID-19. Having lost 5 family members in 14 days, I will never stop talking about it. Talking about the political determinants of health that played a major role in the loss of Black life in the country." And this ties into the question that Dr. Maxey shared. What did you want to accomplish with our community that will help them?
Well, I want to say that how I got started. Let me just go back to how I got started with doing the videos on social media. Let's go back to March 2020, when we didn't know anything about this virus. I was reading on Facebook all these comments that Black people weren't going to get the virus because our melanated skin would protect us against the virus. And I thought about the conditions in which many of us live in. Sometimes we live in multi-generational households. I thought about how reliant we are on public transportation and mass transportation to get to where we go. I thought about how many of our families are headed by single parents. And I had just come back from Kenya, and I have never in my life witnessed as many orphan children as I had witnessed in Kenya. In Kenya, HIV AIDS is the top killer besides, TB, malaria, but HIV AIDS ravages people in Kenya. And I visited a hospital in Kenya, and they said 4 out of 10 children were orphaned because of AIDS. And I saw all these orphaned children, and I thought, oh my God, if this happens here, we have so many single parent families, and many of our families are barely hanging on. How are we going to manage the impact of this virus? What's it going to do to us? And that's how I got started. I said, I had never done this before. I just used my telephone. I didn't feel like I had any media skills, video editing skills. I just picked up my telephone and started recording. And then people would ask me different things, and I would answer the questions. They would say, can you talk about this? Can you talk about this? And then they started sharing all of these messages, and they would say, can you make this public? Because I was just on Facebook with my family and friends. And then, next thing you know, I had a whole library of messages, and I created the YouTube channel just as a place to house these messages. So really what I hoped, my ultimate goal in doing these messages was to try to save lives, to try to prevent COVID death in our community. That's, if that answers your question, Dr. Maxey, that was the end game for me.
So I have another question, if I may. And that was a very good answer. But how can we, both those of us that consider ourselves professionals and those of us that are not professionals, how can we, because of our love of our people, be more trusted messengers? What can we do in that experience that you gained in looking at the responses to your messages in your book? What can each of us do to become more professional, more communicative of the right messages?
Well, I want to share some things with you all that people wrote. These are their own words. I want the people to speak for themselves. It says on page 141, it's a trust issue. Real Blacks are smart to distrust the medical community, Dr. Fauci and Bill Gates. Somebody said to me, this is a bunch of propaganda bullshit and scripted lies. There isn't a pandemic. You sound like a slave robot. Vaccines are killing thousands. Someone else said, I got called this a lot. Disagree. I'm a travel nurse, and 99% of these people in the ER are not Black. Vaccination is not slowing anything. Someone else said to me, lies, 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 lies. I am so disappointed. How much did you get paid to let it go? It ain't as much as a sniffle. Stop this lie. Another person said, we're not going to listen to you, Doc. Rizza Islam told us this vaccine is dangerous for Black people and provided proof. I'm not saying you are wrong. Another person said to me, how much did they pay you to line your people up to the slaughterhouse? Another person said to me, tell that to my best friend that's in the ground now. She was fully vaccinated with boosters. She's dead now. Another person said to me, did you see the 38 report of the side effects of the Pfizer death attacks, neonatal deaths, and 1,000 other side effects? So why am I sharing that? Because if we're ever going to overcome misinformation in the Black community, and this was in response to a message that I had done talking about excess Black deaths and mortality, we're going to have to overcome this mindset. We're going to have to develop many different types of messengers. One of the things that I I think going forward that we're going to have to do, we have to realize that not everybody holds their trust in medical care professionals, not even if they're African American. They don't, some people don't see us enough to have a trusted relationship with us because we are so far few in number. So that's a problem. The supply of African American physicians is limited. I don't know the numbers, but I know one thing, there aren't enough of us around. Then there's a lack of access to healthcare in our community. So people get information from a lot of different sources. And I think at some point we're going to have to talk to these Rizza Islams out there who the people in our communities hold in high esteem. We're going to have to sit down and talk to them. We're going to have to talk to the Nation of Islam. We're going to have to talk to a lot of, think back to 3 years ago. A lot of Christian pastors told their congregations not to get the vaccine, to believe in God, to trust in the Lord, that their faith was going to keep them well. So we have to have these conversations with all walks in our community to make a difference going forward, in my opinion.
Thank you.
So I'd like to follow up with a question. At this point, what have you learned or deduced are the major things needed by our community going forward?
That's a loaded question. I feel like I want to have a lifeline come and help me. Like when you're watching the $1 Million show or whatever on TV and they say, throw out a lifeline. Well, I'm going to have to throw out a lifeline for sure. But one of the things I know, I think that this pandemic has damaged the Black community in so many ways. It's going to take a long time to overcome. One, it's going to take a long time to rebuild trust. Our people do not trust the government. A lot of them do not. They don't trust the CDC. They think the CDC is associated with the Tuskegee syphilis experiment. And we know that it was. It was the US Public Health Service, along with the American Medical Association, that commissioned the Tuskegee syphilis study. So a lot of people are still distrusting. They are distrusting of big pharma. This question of the money that the big pharma made on the vaccines, and were they studied long enough? Are they safe? So I think there's going to have to be a lot of work that is done in the Black community to prepare us for the next pandemic. We need to have access to healthcare. We need to look at who can become trusted messengers in the future. I've done a lot of community education over the years of my career. And one of the big lessons that I've learned is that people want to hear from athletes. They want to hear from entertainers, artists. I once managed a program with Black men. And so I said to them, who do you want to hear from? Now I live in the Pittsburgh area. They said, if you bring us the Pittsburgh Steelers, we will come. And I said, you mean I can't bring you Black male doctors? They said, nope, we want the Pittsburgh Steelers. And so I brought them the Pittsburgh Steelers. And do you know, it was one of the best programs, and I learned a lesson. The Steelers coaches, they talked to them about some of the players that they had to let go because they had high blood pressure and they weren't up to practicing. They had medical conditions that weren't managed. And because they were in poor health, they could not perform as professional athletes. And so I found that the men really listened to that. And so, if we have to think outside the box. That's one of the lessons that I've learned. I see Dr. Jordan shaking his head. So if Dr. Jordan shakes his head, I must be saying something right. Thank you, Dr. Jordan. The other thing I learned is where we get our information from. I'll tell you a story. On December 27th, one of my videos was posted on a source of media called Baller Alert. I had never in my life heard of Baller Alert, but Baller Alert is a news, if you want to call it news entertainment service that over 7.4 million people subscribe to. And they're the Gen Xers and the Gen Ys. And, you know, all of a sudden I went, what do they call it? Virtual, when you have viral. I went viral. I had over 1 million people. My kids were saying, people were texting them saying, your mom is on Baller Alert. You know, all of a sudden people were listening. But I learned something. And Jocelyn, I think you asked me a question. It was such an eye opener. They called me and said, please do not read the comments. And because they said, please do not read the comments, you know, I had to go read them. But I was so sorry that I did. These folks, these young people, and most of them are young, they don't believe what I had to say about the pandemic. They thought I was paid. They called me an agent. I learned something very interesting. A lot of people said I look like Patti LaBelle and sound like Patti LaBelle. And they commented that, Auntie, does she make good pies? I wonder if she makes good sweet potato pies. They said, can Auntie read me a bedtime story? So again, it's a different experience when you're on social media, and you just have to be prepared for that. You can't let it get to you. You have to remind yourself what your mission is and stay focused and get the job done.
One of the things that comes to my mind based upon your comments just now is that we may need a course available to our young people and even some of our old people just on basic health and medical understanding. I've talked to many people like you have who don't believe fat meat is greasy, who don't believe that high blood pressure will hurt you, just basic knowledge. And they get on the internet and hear all sorts of garbage. And I think we may be more vulnerable than other groups of people. Would that type of education have any effect over time?
Well, one thing I've learned, and I saw Dr. Stephen Thomas put a comment in the chat, you have to go for where the people are. And that is one thing Dr. Stephen Thomas has done. And those are some of the lessons that I've learned from him and his work. You have to go to where the people are. And people get their information. They get it from the barbershop. They get it from the hair salon. they get it from social media. So I don't know that a course per se, Dr. Maxey, would help. We'd have to kind of do a poll, or I'll extend that lifeline to other people to comment and see what they say. I don't know. I just know this experience has taught me that we need to do things differently to engage our communities. We need to be on the street where they are so that we can combat misinformation right then and there. I once did a outreach. I was working for the health department at the time, and they had me going into the nursing homes because the nursing home staff did not want to get vaccinated. And I remember I was giving my, talk, and a person, and I was talking about MISC, the multi-system inflammatory disease in children. And a person in the audience raised their hand, and she stood up and she says, what the doctor is saying is true. She said, my grandson just had to have a heart transplant from MISC. He's 8 years old. Now, there was nothing that I said that had the impact of what this grandmother said. So my point is, sometimes it's the experience of people that have the most impact on other people. That was a lesson that I've learned over these past 3 years.
Wow, that is so powerful, Dr. Johnson. I wonder if we can unmute Tony Wofford. He has a question or a comment. And I think Dr. Jordan has a question or a comment as well. Go ahead, Mr. Wofford.
Thank you. One, let me say, sis, I applaud you what you're doing. It's hard work. I'm not an MD or PhD or epidemiologist, but I created a program years back with matter of fact, with Dr. Jordan, where I gave away concert tickets for people to test for HIV. And I tested over 30,000+ people in 18 months, 24 states, 66 cities. But the key for me, and has been, especially after losing all those family members to COVID, was a partnership with physicians, and we have to be patient because we have to sit through some ignorant conversations. And it's okay, because I mean, you have to treat it like the barbershop. The beauty of the barbershop is there's no big eyes and little U's in the barbershop. Everybody's opinion counts, right? And you have the flexibility to be as intelligent as you are or as ignorant as you may be. And I think what we have to do is quit running from our people and recognize and realize that we have to do things different as it relates to our people, and not confuse our differences with somehow being deficient. Because I think one of the most frustrating things in the world for me is when we try to do research and we do projects and all that, and we with the guidelines of what's evidence-based. Well, what's evidence-based in West Hollywood don't work in South Central if you're talking about HIV. And we need to create our own language and logic of how we define, and develop ourselves. And I think until we start partnering not only with grassroots, I mean, down on the ground, brothers and sisters, and those socially conscious elected officials and socially conscious ministers. And then when I say socially conscious, I'm talking about the ones that are more concerned about social justice than personal prosperity. So you have to cherry pick. You can't think just because Negro got a cross around his check at a church and he on TV that he actually has the people's best interests at heart. And we ain't got to call nobody names and murder mouth them and savage them, but we have to be honest with ourselves in terms of what we're trying to do. Because there's no way in hell after losing 5 family members am I going to suffer historical amnesia in terms of what COVID has done to us as a people. It exposed every comorbidity and every disease state that we're at the top of. And if you're scared to say black, let's just say data. How about we do that? But we got to just do that, and we can't be afraid. And I'm not saying anybody is afraid, so don't get all macho on me about it. I'm saying that we have to get and partner with. I'll wrap it up with this: partner with people, basically in the community that ain't got nothing to lose. My house knows reasonable. I can say what I want to when I get ready to, and I don't have to buck. And I think also, lastly, we've got to include you guys. Because if all we talk about is Tuskegee and how we can't trust white folk, we do all you guys a disservice who went through the academy to be affirmed to do what you do. We do David Satcher dishonor when we don't recognize all those wonderful, beautiful black physicians, and including all of you guys that have come before us to make sure we don't live through Tuskegee anymore. We should talk about it, yes, but let's not park it there. Let's talk about y'all and what y'all do. Didn't mean to
Thank
preach
you so
like
much,
that.
Mr. Wofford. Thank you.
I'll say amen after you, Mr. Wofford. Amen.
I'll say amen too.
Amen indeed. Dr. Jordan.
Yes, and I really appreciate what Tony just said. My father was the first Black chiropractor in this country, and he would have patients every day, 7 days a week, coming from the north on the Greyhound and Trailway buses to see him. And it was amazing when we had the polio vaccine, Blacks would not take it. And they came to him, the white folks, to ask him why. And he said, why are you separating? You're doing the colored schools and the white schools. Mix them up. Let them see that they're getting the same vaccine. One school system in Wheatley, Arkansas did. Another school system in Brinkley, Arkansas did not. And they had a completely different turnout. I think it was important for people to see. And looking back, what Daddy did, he said, no, you're not going to have the vaccines situated so people can know which one you're giving to who. People are afraid you're not giving them the real thing. So let's set it up a way where they don't know. I mean, a little bitty thing made just a big difference. And when he walked in the barbershops and said, you all make sure your kids take the vaccine. Everybody said yes. I think we haven't forgotten some of the early connections we have had because we have been screwed over for years in terms of healthcare things. And yes, we should not be taking Tuskegee. When people say Tuskegee, now it's an insult to us. But we have got to do things to make sure people trust us better than they have. And it's not impossible. I talked with someone at the Nation of Islam, and my comments to them was, Farrakhan should have invited Edwina, the young Black lady who had created the vaccine. He should have invited her first to see her, and should have been the first to come out and say, we're gonna all take the vaccine, rather than saying don't take it. It's a mindset we have to have. If they want to kill you, they know how to do it without doing a vaccine. They know what drink you use, what coke you drink, everything too. But I think we have to become more proactive than we have in the past. And this is a good time, because I don't think this is the worst one that's coming. There's something coming a lot worse. So we need to really get on our P's and Q's and S's and T's to get this done.
So let me put out a consideration for all of our panelists and Dr. Johnson as well. In two views, a lot of comments that I've had from people in the community is, we don't trust the government, we don't trust white people, and we don't trust anything white people are doing, including the CDC. And there was a slave consultant back years ago who wanted to teach Blacks to only trust what whites say. And therefore, if they only trusted whites, they could extend slavery and mental slavery for another 400 years. That was Willie Lynch. So the other question is, many of us know that our white brothers and sisters who are scientists, that many of them are among the top physicians and scientists in the world. How do we transmit that we've been misguided, that everything white is bad, that everything Black is bad? How do we approach that? Because we're getting it from both sides. And I think that misinformation has made us very vulnerable. I'd like some opinions on that, or what do you think?
Could we also unmute Dr. Stephen Thomas? He is such an expert on working in the community.
Dr. Thomas from the University of Maryland.
Yes,
Hello, Dr. Stephen Thomas. Can you unmute him, Simon?
He said his sound is broken. I don't know
Okay.
what that means.
So Dr. Thomas, if you can, call in on the phone, or you can call me. My number is 310-686-8490, and I can put it on speaker. We'd love to hear from you.
He's posted a plethora of information in the chat too.
Okay. Well,
Okay.
we may not be able to hear from Dr. Thomas, but although I consider him as someone that I really look up to in terms of being an expert in working in our community. So Dr. Maxey, we'll call on somebody else.
Well, while we're calling on someone else, Dr. Johnson, every time I talk to someone in Maryland, they say, do you know Dr. Stephen Thomas? Do you know the work that he's doing in the barbershops? So I'm very disappointed that we can't hear from Dr. Thomas, but like Dr. Hines said, there's a lot of information in the chat. I'll make one brief comment though. I think that when we look at going where folks are, beauty shops, barbershops, et cetera, I agree that is not the time to walk in with your MD or your PhD and start pontificating. However, if that's your barbershop where you go and people know you, or if that's your beauty shop where you go and people know you, it's a very different conversation. So to the point made earlier, we need to be in our communities and people need to know us. So then we can drop a little science in the barbershop because they see us talking about the football game the week before, or they see us there talking about what's happening down the street or what's happening in the local community. So community can't trust you if you're not part of the community. You can't just show up and just be real smart. And one last comment, Dr. Johnson, my sister, some of the comments that you read that people throw at you, keep the faith. You continue to go out there. Every time they say something bad, Dr. Maxey and Dr. Neighbor Stevens and Dr. Hines and Dr. Walks, we got 3 good comments for you, because somebody decided to put what you wrote on Baller or whatever the name of the site is, that somebody decided that it was worth reaching out to that group. And so you just continue to, sometimes you got to take the kicks with the kisses.
Definitely. And I developed sort of a triage system because, again, I was so surprised, it is sort of a shock, Jocelyn, at first, when you get these, are you paid? You're just an agent. You're just a Uncle Tom. You're a messenger of the CIA. And you think of all the years you spent working in the community, it is a little hard at first. But I developed a triage system, my own triage system. So my first, if it was a threat, I don't tolerate threats. If you're going to threaten me personally, or some people threaten to kill Dr. Fauci, or, if you're going to make a threat, then every social media platform has a mechanism to report threats. So I just report the threats. And then there are some people that I just block and delete because I know that, they're just not going to contribute anything of value. The anti-vaxxers are a very strong community, and we fight a lot of misinformation. Those of us physicians and healthcare professionals that do this education, we realize we're on a target list for these anti-vaxxers, and they can get a little intimidating, but like I said, we just keep going. But and then the other thing is, a lot of times the people who watch your videos and leave the comments, they defend, there will be a conversation after conversation. I just don't have to do anything. I just let them work it out themselves. I don't even have to come to my own defense because they do. So, after you're in social media for a while, and I have to admit, my 3 children kind of helped me along this journey. They would say, Mom, if you're going to be doing this, you have to be prepared. When I have to confess here, when I first opened up my YouTube channel, I wasn't ready. I actually had all comments turned off. It took me about a month, and then I tiptoed into the comment journey. But once you're out there, and you just, again, I try to be consistent. I try to use reputable sources of health information. I have shared my experiences. I've shared my experiences with COVID. I've had COVID. I have a cousin who's a pastor of a church. He said, Rhonda, you need to share your experience with COVID. So on my sick bed, I recorded my videos, and they're hard to watch. Even now, those are some videos that I almost can't watch because, you remember being very sick. I got the Delta variant. But, it really reminds you how sick that you were. But, and I've shared my experience getting these vaccines, my side effects. So I try to have some authenticity in my messaging. And if I feel like if I'm going to be out there, I need to be an example for myself as well. So, but yes, I'm not discouraged.
Just to piggyback off that wonderful point too is, and to get to Dr. Maxey's question, I think the space where the paralysis that I think that Black people in particular are coming to, as far as where can they get trusted information, who to trust. In some ways, we look at our credentials, right, and think that should be a reason why you should believe me. Right. But for other people see our credentials and say that's an evidence of your indoctrination into the system or whatever. But I think with the way in particular that younger folks and things like that are receiving so much information, people are straight up, they're 100% confused. And I think Dr. Gibson put in the chat, I lost it because there's so much in there, but it basically said they don't care how much you know, they want to know how much you, until they know how much you care. And authenticity, even in the comments that in from your book, Dr. Johnson, over and over people spoke to authenticity. And it's in that same story that you shared about, you know, the woman that got up and shared her story. I think one of the things that we're not always leading with is with our authenticity. We like to lead with facts and information. And sometimes it's very overwhelming for people, and it doesn't connect us to people. People connect differently now. And I see it in my kids, and I see it in teenagers too, right? They connect differently, and what leads to credibility isn't the same thing. And we have to learn how to trade credibility in whatever is the currency that the audience that you're trying to reach uses. And it's not always just wisdom and the wisdom of my experience and the wisdom of, you know, the alphabet soup behind my name that says, here's why you should listen to me.
Well said. Dr. Sherrod has her hand up. If we can unmute Dr. Sherrod, please.
Oh, yeah, thank you. I just want to commend Dr. Johnson for writing this book, but most of all for getting on social media. That takes a lot of courage. And I think the issues that you're bringing up are very relevant. I actually attended a webinar yesterday given by the National Medical Association called Triple Threat. And everybody was raving about how great the webinar was, and it was excellent. But one layperson who had been on the webinar talked to me and said, you know what, that was a good webinar, but they didn't talk at all about the side effects of the vaccine. And so I think one thing that we have to remember is that we have to give a balanced presentation. And we have to let them know, okay, you could take the vaccine, you may have these effects. Nobody want to talk about the side effects. And we know all medications have side effects, all of them. But we need to address those people who are getting side effects and tell them what to do and how to deal with that. And I think when you present both sides of the story, you come across as being, I think that increases your credibility and your integrity, because you're giving both sides of the story, and then they can make the decision themselves as to what they want to do, as opposed to pushing really hard one side of the story. And, you know, I was just listening to Oprah this morning. There was a lady on there saying we're now in the age where we can't even have an opinion unless we get labeled. And I think we really need to look at that, because people need to discuss things and see them from different points of views and feel like they have the option to do that. We do know that there is a lot of systemic influence over us. And I think it was Carter Woodson said, if you can control their minds, you don't have to worry about their actions. So in this systemic thing that we are in, there is a lot of indoctrination. And you may not even be aware of it, but it is. And other people are, some people are, some people are not. They call it being woke, I think. But I want to commend you for bringing this discussion to the Black Health Trust and for writing that book, but most of all for being on social media.
Thank you, Jesse.
Thank you, Doctor. Appreciate your comments.
And I do want to add that not telling people what to do is very important. When I would talk about the vaccines, and as Jesse said, being fully transparent about possible side effects. When the issue of myocarditis came up in young people, I did not walk away from it. I talked about it, because my message is always talk to your doctor, because I don't know what the heart issues might be for the children or the young people that might be getting these vaccines. You know, so I always push them to see their own doctor. I've been very careful to never give medical advice. But I do think we have to be transparent. We cannot minimize and not talk about the risk of myocarditis from the messenger RNA vaccines. You know, when they authorized the vaccines for children, for the pediatric population, I would give messages that said, you know, the FDA is going to be reviewing this in the next 3 or 4 weeks. You have time to begin to be thinking about this plan. What are you going to do? Are you going to give your children the vaccine? I did not say you should get your children vaccinated. I said to parents, you should be thinking about this. Here's the information you need to know. Who do you want to talk to? Do you want to talk to your grandparents? Do you want to talk to your friends? Are you going to have this conversation with your doctor? And I think that is very important because, you know, I would say I know many people that aren't vaccinated, okay? And they are not any less than I am because they chose not to get vaccinated. As a pediatrician, we always dealt with religious exemptions around vaccines. Not all of our families got vaccinated. In Pennsylvania, there was always the Pennsylvania Dutch and the Amish community. Those folks did not get vaccinated, period. I saw my only cases of tetanus, severe tetanus in Amish patients because they didn't get the vaccine, at least that particular version of the Amish faith. I'm not pretending to be an expert. So we have to understand that not everybody is going to get the vaccine. And we also have to give them tools. If they're not going to be vaccinated, we want to give them other tools that they can employ to minimize their risk of getting COVID, and also to let them know about what to do when they get COVID.
Thank you
Dr.
so much,
Johnson,
Dr. Johnson.
I think one of the other things that might have been confusing is that we're used to vaccines preventing illness. But as it turns out, the vaccine that we have doesn't necessarily prevent the illness, but hopefully it mitigates the severity of the illness. Can you comment on what we might have thought in the past, like with measles and et cetera, versus now?
Well, you know, when I remember when I got my first shot, I took it at a place where they had this great big billboard and it said, "This is our shot of hope." And it was our shot of hope. We had high hopes for these vaccines. But as we've learned, it's the experience with the virus. The virus has mutated. The virus has mutated over 15 million different times. So, you know, it's amazing to me. It's almost miraculous that the original vaccines plus the booster, bivalent booster, still protect against severe illness and death, given how much this virus has mutated. I don't know if I answered your question, Dr. Maxey.
You did.
Okay.
In fact,
So-
I heard a sermon this morning about demonic forces, that once you get rid of a demon, it may come back 7 times more powerful, but we won't get into that. Go ahead, Dr. Walsh.
Dr. Maxey, you can always get into your Bible. There are a lot of worse places you can go. Dr. Lawson has his hand up. Dr. Lawson, who presented so brilliantly to us last week on a critically important topic, as is Dr. Johnson today. This stuff is so important. It is so important that we talk about these topics. Go ahead, Dr. Lawson.
Yeah, I just want to emphasize this is really a great discussion in another way too, and that is that what we're looking at is some underlying problems in terms of how we transmit information. It's not just the vaccine, it's even our educational system. Dropout system in terms of education system is horrible, especially for people of color. And part of it is that folks have been taught to accept certain kinds of information, and our educational system simply is not using the technology that advertisers, that gamers and others have already learned that can really reach out to people. So I think we need to learn from those folks as well, because it's not just a vaccine, it's a whole rejection of almost anything that has to do with science and technology, unless it ties into playing with your personal computer. And the other thing is that I think it's very important that we know there's another medium, that is talk radio. I found it very fascinating. I sometimes go on it myself, unlike on some of these other approaches. Talk radio, you can actually talk back to whoever's involved. The risk for talk radio is if you get a hostile host who can just chop you off right there. But again, let's not forget a lot of our folks get their information from talk radio. Some of these hosts are some of our folks who perpetuate some of the bizarre ideas that's circulating in the community.
No, thank you, Dr.
Amen.
Lawson. We're getting close to the time that we have to sign off. But before we do, Simon, I want to close with the same thing we started with as soon as we get last comment. So Dr. Rhonda Johnson, we really appreciate you today and everything you had to say in your book. And I'd like to invite you for final comments before our moderators comment.
Yes, I hope that some of you will join me in social media. We need more people. We need more of us. One of the comments that's in my book, yay, they say, yay, a Black doctor on social media, or we're so happy to see you, Dr. Johnson. So as you have to have time. What do you need? You need time for sure. But do it however you can give time. But that would be my parting remarks. Don't walk away from this enormous opportunity. You have to go where the people are. That's why I joined TikTok, because there are billions of people that use TikTok. Social media is where the world talks to each other. Many of my followers are from Argentina, from Australia, from Brazil, from Haiti, from England, from the Philippines. They're from all over the world, and they are listening to me and interacting with me. So I would encourage, I know Dr. Thomas has built a legendary reputation doing barbershops and hair salons. I haven't done that. I don't have the bandwidth to do that kind of work. So I've chosen social media as my platform, but wherever we go, whatever we do, it will make a difference. That's what I will leave with.
May I ask you one question, Dr. Johnson?
Yes.
Can we ask the person who is most proud today of your presentation to just say a brief hello?
My mother?
Yes.
Okay. She will have to be unmuted. Mom, do you want to raise your hand so they'll know who to unmute?
iPad syncs iPad. That's the one.
Is Mom unmuted?
Not yet. Can you, Mom, can you click on the unmute button and let's see if Simon was able to allow you to unmute?
Okay, well, if we can't get unmuted, we'd love to just hear from her. We need to honor our mothers and fathers, but I think mothers have to really be honored.
There we go. Go ahead,
Now,
Mom.
right?
Thank you.
No.
You're unmuted, Mom.
Okay, well, on this video here, I feel a little intimidated with all of you on here who are so highly recognized and have done so many things to help us out. And of course, I am elated of the journey that my daughter Rhonda has taken. I noticed when she was a young child how she was going to be in an area where she was aggressive. She were in organizations when she was a teenager, and they went places in on the airplanes and things like that, and I had to adjust to all of that. So from a young person, she has always been motivated and driven to do successful things to help her nation of people. And I've always been proud of her, of course, as a mother. And thank you for acknowledging me today. Thank you.
We appreciate you, the force behind her success. Thank you. Dr.
Okay,
Hines,
thank you.
final words, Dr. Hines?
You know, oftentimes, well, first let me say thank you, Dr. Johnson, for coming on. And I've had the opportunity to read your book. It's a great book. And it was really, insightful in the sense that the bi-directional content, right? Like there's oftentimes we're always putting information out, but you also got to see some of the other things that came in. And that was very unique and, like I said, eye-opening. One of the last things I will also say is we talk a lot on the Black Health Trust about what we can do, what can we do, what can we do. And one of the things that I also admire about you taking this journey is an example of, yes, there are corporate and collective things that we can do, but there are also individual things, individual steps that we can take that also have the potential to have great impact beyond what I would imagine you would have expected or imagined. So sometimes you can wait, there's a space to wait for other people, and then sometimes there's a space to go ahead and go.
Thank you, Dr. Hines.
Go, that's important.
Dr. Walks?
Thanks, Dr. Maxey. Dr. Johnson, splendid, spectacular. Thank you so much for doing what you did and then for sharing it with us, because it is a model for us to go out and get into our community. And we talked a little bit about this last week, about just getting out of your office to the extent you can, spending the time to the extent you can, and being out there. One comment about what we can do going forward. We really have to continue to stress the importance of us being as healthy as we can be. We talk a lot about how COVID or RSV or the flu or whatever hits those who are medically vulnerable. And so our best preparation is to be the healthiest version of ourselves that we can possibly be. So I encourage folks, other Black Health Trust programs around diabetes, around hypertension, around cholesterol, around heart disease, around cancer, all of the things that come out and get us. I quote frequently our friend, the Reverend Jesse Jackson, who says, "We are the sickest and we are dying the quickest." And we have to take that very seriously. So with all the work that Dr. Thomas is doing and that Dr. Johnson is doing, and all of the rest of the folks on our program today, I just think we just need to continue to stress the importance of great general health, including mental health.
Thank you so much, Dr. Walks. Dr. Neighbor-Stevens, as you give your final comments, can you also mention our upcoming programs?
Barbara, before you begin, can I acknowledge that I see my daughter and my only granddaughter on the video as well? Not only my mom, but my daughter and my granddaughter. Can you wave your hand, Jocelyn? And that's my daughter and my granddaughter too.
Nice.
Very good.
Okay, I'm done.
Dr. Neighbor-Stevens?
I don't know, as mothers, I don't know if we're ever done, but I want to thank Dr. Johnson for sharing herself with us today. And Dr. Hines really nailed my takeaway from the book, and there was a lot of good stuff in the book, but my takeaway from the book is there's no excuse. You can do something and you need to do it. So that is just more encouragement for me to continue trying to make a contribution to society for as long as I can. And this time, Dr. Walks, I won't forget, I have been moving around in the community a little bit more the last 2 weeks than I have in the last 2.5 years. And I am constantly concerned by what I see, which is people seeming to not have continued the care that they need to exhibit in protecting themselves. So again, it's an old song now, but please wash your hands, wear your mask when you're in a crowd or inside, and try to keep yourself as healthy as you can. Now, as far as next week, I'm very excited about what we're going to be doing next week. I've heard a lot, and I'm sure many of you have heard all kinds of things said about breast cancer in Black women. And I have reached out to a colleague who is a breast oncologist, Dr. Iman Washington, and Moffitt Cancer Center here in Tampa, who's going to talk with us about some of the myths about and misinformation circulating about breast cancer in Black women. So stay tuned.
And we have several other programs. Could you just mention them briefly?
The one after that is, and you know, I misspoke. Dr. Hines, you didn't correct me. Next week is the 12th. I'm jumping ahead, right? Yeah, okay. Next week is Super Bowl. So we're going to talk about how to handle medical emergencies in your home environment. And the leader of our talk will be our own Dr. Hines. And then the following week, the 15th, I think, whatever.
The 19th.
19th, the week after Dr. Hines will be Dr. Iman Washington.
Okay. And then the week following that is Dr. Tony Brown. And then the week of March 5th is Dr. Rhonda Smith. So we've got our lineup for you. Thank you so much for attending, Dr. Rhonda Johnson. Thank you for being our hero
having me.
today. And we can close out. Simon, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring, ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.